iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey, everybody, and thanks so much for joining for another awesome session of the iHeartPodcast Network Speaker Series. This is the moment in every week where I get to stop down and talk with one of our partners, a creator that we are in business with in partnership. And today is a very special session for us. It's our own Enrique Santos. Enrique is sort of an amazing creator here at iHeart, period. He's the chairman and chief creative officer of iHeart Latino, but he's also the head of and majority owner of a new podcast network that we put out there into the world called My Cultura. We launched this 3 or 4 months ago, announced it maybe 4 or 5 months ago. There's a lot behind this network, how we got to that moment where we decided to build this with you, Enrique, and how we decided to build it and put it out there into the world. Took a lot of thought, and we learned a lot of things about how Latinx creators are treated, viewed in the world, in podcasting, etc. So we're going to talk through a lot of that today, but sort of urgently today, you're using this new network to launch a new show, SOS Cuba. And I want to sort of segue into that too as we have this conversation. So first of all, Enrique, thank you so much for hanging out with me today to talk through this. It means a lot.
Thank you, Conal. Always great to talk to you. And everyone just needs to know the reason why we launched My Cultura is so that we can better Conal's Español. And you're, he said, My Cultura, you're speaking it very well. Muy bien, amigo. Lo estás hablando casi perfecto.
I'm trying so hard. I never know if I should just lean in and go nuts or if I'm going to get laughed at.
No one is gonna laugh at you.
They should. They really should. So listen, I think one of the coolest things about podcasting is no one started out as a podcaster. We all come from other mediums. You clearly come from the medium of broadcast radio, but even prior to that, I think your story, even before audio, is super interesting because it means you bring to bear a lot of experience to this world of audio storytelling that we all call a day job. Where do you come from? What's your background?
My life experience comes from the streets, not from the streets like a rapper would say, you know, drug dealing or, you know, trying to survive in the streets, in the sense that, you know, playing in the streets to the streets of Miami, and then becoming a police officer. And, you know, they always say I have street smarts, right? Just real life, you know, issues that, you know, all kids go through and anywhere USA or anywhere really in the world. But growing up, you know, as a Cuban American, living in both worlds, you know, speaking to my friends in English, but home, mom and dad speaking in Spanish. And I thank them for that, because it's thanks to them that I am fully bicultural and bilingual. And thanks to this amazing country that opened its arms, you know, to my parents and grandparents, that I was privileged to have been born here. So all my life, all I ever wanted to do was become a police officer. And I was a police explorer, and then a 911, you know, dispatcher, and then from there into the police academy, became a police officer, and kind of by mistake. Well, it wasn't a mistake. Everything in life happens for a reason, as they say. I called the radio station. The guy that picked up was the program director. We became friends. He tested it, put me on the radio. I loved what I did. He liked what I sounded like, and one thing led to another. And here I am, 20 plus years later, you know, with an awesome career in broadcasting. But you know, I'm not very good talking about myself. Conal's good at getting conversation out of me, but man, I just think that, you know, I'm a product of my environment, and what a great, and it hasn't been that. I'm not saying it hasn't been hard. It's been very rough for me, and everything that I have, I've had to work for, and that's why I'm very proud of what I have. A very strong work ethic. Watching my dad, you know, work in several jobs to make, you know, ends meet. You know, I've been working since I was 13, 14 years old with the family business, and then onto other things. But just moving and just doing things and inspiring other people, right? So I'm just privileged right now to be in a great position where I'm at with my my show that's in, syndicated Spanish show, and then I also have a syndicated English show, and then I run the entire operation, like you just mentioned, for iHeart Latino and all of our initiatives going forward. Our tentpole, our Latino tentpole here in the company, the iHeartRadio Fiesta Latina, that I produce and host every year, that I'm very proud of. And at the same time, I'm able to still give back to my community as a reserve police officer with the city of Miami, and now with this awesome new venture with My Cultura Podcast Network. Just being able to bring great people to the plate, and being able to do the same thing that was done for me for others. Give other people the spotlight, the opportunity, and the microphone to connect.
So the one thing you touched on twice there was this sort of this dual life. Spanish and English is the most obvious way to put that, but it's also a dual life culturally, personality-wise. The way I relate to that is my parents came to the United States in the 60s from Ireland, and I often felt like, not to the extent of a Latino in the United States, because I think the differences are more extreme and harder to overcome, candidly. But for me, I still felt the difference of my public life and my family life, and sometimes I felt embarrassed that I'd have to cover up for my mom and dad's accent, or the fact that they didn't know what it meant to be American. They didn't know what football meant, something totally different to them. And sometimes it was a source of pride. Sometimes it was a source of embarrassment. What was that dual life for you growing up? And this is the last question, I promise, on you personally, but I think it drives a lot of the spirit of My Cultura. Is a lot of, it's in the name. It's My is English, Cultura is Spanish. This duality that I think Latinx creators have to live in their lives. What was that like for you as a kid?
Very similar to what you're describing, and how interesting that something, you mentioned the accent, to try to fit in, and I think we all go through that as we watch our parents and our grandparents assimilate, right? And we try to embrace our culture, but at the same time accept the country that we live in. For Latinos, or for any immigrant, right? It's not uncommon to hold and it might be difficult for someone who's not bicultural to understand this, but to me, it's just not a big deal. It's just second nature to me, and I'm sure it's become second nature to you, that you can stand up and feel proud for that when the Irish national anthem plays and when the American national anthem plays. So Latinos, in the same, in that same context. I remember as a kid being, 12, 13, 14, my dad playing his Spanish music, and it wasn't cool because none of my friends listened to that. And that's not the music it wasn't the cool music to listen to. And it wasn't until, I remember the first time I got my driver's license, as a matter of fact, I remember being in the car and being able to drive mom or dad's car and jam into the radio. And I started to, gravitate to my roots secretly. So my parents wouldn't hear me listening to the music that I criticized. Dad, turn that down, years prior. Now all of a sudden I started finding, this music was cool. And then I didn't want to have it on too loud, because if I pulled up to a car next to me and I wasn't listening to popular, or urban music or rap music, and then they heard me listening to salsa, merengue, or reggaeton, it was like, what, you seem alien to certain different people. I actually had a professor from the Florida International University listen to my show a couple years back, and they contacted us because they did an assignment listening to her students. She had her students listen to a week of my show and then do a report on the show. She says that I do something that's called glossing, and I didn't even know what was a thing. But it's basically it's like you're translating, but not real. You're translating in real time. You're able to explain to people what's happening. I'm probably not explaining it right. I'm probably messing it up. But it's where you say just the right amount of translation that people can understand, what's going on. So that's fascinating how you do that, and how you can switch back and forth to English and Spanish. And again, that's only thanks to my parents. And it's a blessing, again, to be bicultural and live in such a special moment. Hey, 2 languages, 3 languages. I admire people that speak, 4 and 5 languages. It's amazing. The more languages you can speak, the better. How many more opportunities. But yeah, definitely, I don't feel it as much now. When I was a kid growing up, trying to assimilate, trying to find people that sounded like me, that talked like me, that found what I found interesting. And it was quite difficult for me. And that's why I feel it's kind of like I owe it back, to everyone else and to the new generations that they have someone that they can identify with and say, oh, okay, Enrique thinks like I think. Enrique talks like I talk and lives like I talk. And that's exactly what I try to do every day on my radio programs and what we're trying to do. And we're having a lot of success with, thank God, with My Cultura Podcast Network. Very excited to all the new subscribers that we have on the network and all the great shows that we have out and the ones that are still to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like these things that as a kid feel like challenges later in life become competitive advantages, where you feel like you learn a thing that other folks just didn't. You learn how to cope. That turns into a new tool. But let's get into My Cultura. So maybe a year ago now, we started this idea of in podcasting, there is a case of underrepresentation. What does that mean in sort of plain speak? It means that creators who are not white are rare. And this is almost across the board. It is, for me, maybe most striking with Latinx creators. Maybe because almost 20% of the United States population is Latinx. In podcasting, it's actually the fastest growing ethnicity of new podcast listeners is Latinx. It has 6x'd over the last decade, the amount of Latinx listeners in podcasting. It's like all data points, all research points toward more Latinx creators should be in podcasting because the audience is jumping in. A lot of the sort of underbelly of that research or data that we saw was that a lot of Latinx listeners who were finding podcasts were actually turning away because they would test it, look at the medium, and it didn't felt like it was speaking to them. This is the biggest miss you can have as a medium. But let me ask a broader question, because this isn't just a podcasting story. This is an all entertainment and media story. I mean, one of the stats I saw when we were talking about building this new network was only 5% of leading roles in TV and film are held by Latinx people, against a population of almost 20%, with no data to back up that a Latinx star doesn't drive box office or anything like that. It's just sort of, you just end up in consternation. It's hard to understand why. So it's an unfair and very big, broad question, but why do we underrepresent in media? What are we afraid of?
That's a very good and complicated question. What are we afraid of? Listen, I'm not afraid of people. I'm not afraid of growth. I don't think there's an answer to that unless we really dig down to the deep. We start pulling some layers back, and there's a lot. It's a racial problem. There's a lot of people that just are afraid. You look at the last numbers in the census and you see where Latinos are growing, and that intimidates a lot of people that don't speak the language or that aren't like us. And we are driving a lot of industries, like you just mentioned, but we're also driving your Uber and your and your Postmates, and we're also driving now the conversation. And I think that's what important. You nailed it right on the head. It's important that we tell our own stories. You don't want anyone else telling your story. You tell your truth. You connect with your people. And that's what gives you credibility. And that's where you have that special connection. For years, there's been this thing, we'll get off topic when it comes to podcasting. We'll go back to radio, right? Where I started, where I still am. We still have so many Latinos that listen. People have been saying, since I started in radio 20 something years ago, Conal, I remember people saying, radio's dead. No one listens to that shit anymore. Quite the contrary. And much more so for Latino radio. Latinos are looking for a friend. They're looking for compañía. They're looking for that companion, someone that hey, that's my friend. And Latinos are loyal to brands. They're loyal to people and to connections. That's why our novelas, right? You see our novelas, when our grandparents used to see novelas, say, Conal, mi amigo, no me has llamado en tantos años. Why haven't you FaceTimed me in more than 20 years, Conal? You don't love me anymore. That's one word that always strikes me. It hits me in the gut every time. Latinos say it doesn't matter what country, Latino country you're from. They'll say it to you all the time. And our abuelas and our father says, I could have talked to my dad yesterday. And we're so dramatic. He'll call me, Enriquito, ya tú no me llamas. Tú no llamas a nadie. You don't love me anymore. You don't call anybody. Dad, I spoke to you yesterday. So, that connection is it's all about connection. It's about that.
Very different than Irish. They're like, what's wrong? What did you break?
Oh, okay. So when the Irish call you, they think you're calling for something because you need something. See, Latinos when they call you, they're complaining. You're calling them, and on top of the fact that you're calling them, they're complaining that you haven't called them enough. If that ever makes any sense. So with podcasting, it's the same thing. We have that connection, that human connection that we all have as humans. Of course, but Latinos, again, are very, they miss home as immigrants. They miss their people. We're very, very, very close to our culture, to our cultura, very close to, to family. Listen, just a quick example. One of the biggest things in a Latino household that would be one of the biggest stressors is, putting, your grandmother or your father in a nursing home. That's like a bad word. And in other cultures, it's much more acceptable, Having your kids leave the house when you're 18, what? If you're 40 and still need to come home, mom's got a bed for you. And she's not going to complain. She'll always want to cook for you and, and clean after you. So that's, those just cultural differences, that still stay true till today.
Some of the stuff we're trying to capture in this podcast network that you built in My Cultura is a lot of those elements of radio that are truly amazing, like that companionship element of broadcast radio, where it's more than just live streamed music. It's actually having a friend in your ear. We're trying to capture that in podcasting generally, but certainly in My Cultura. And it felt like maybe across the last 12 months, maybe about halfway through it, it felt like a headwind turned into a tailwind. We started to get momentum on this network, meaning more and more people were jumping into the mission, if you will, and contributing shows and ideas. And two easy examples, because they're just awesome, are Amara La Negra and the Estefans, both friends of yours. Maybe just talk through both of those creators and what you think, just how that went, how getting them into the network went, what those conversations were like.
Listen, with the Estefans, to me, it makes it a perfect fit. When I started in radio 20-something years ago, I was considered a shock jock. Many people actually, Newsweek magazine, I remember, did an article and they compared me they called me the Spanish Howard Stern. Things have changed. Things have evolved. When I got into radio, I didn't know anybody. I had no friends. So it wasn't like, don't talk about this person. Make sure you talk well about this person. I didn't have friends who were calling me to say, hey, please play my music. I was just Enrique Santos, and everyone's scratching their head. What is this guy that was doing prank calls back then? And I parked my police car and took over a radio microphone, and we made radio history doing prank calls to Fidel Castro and to Hugo Chavez, and we really, shook things up. And I remember one of the first people that, of course, I knew and that I respected that actually reached out on his own, not any of my doing. He did it on his own, was Emilio Estefan. He called me up. He said, Enrique, and I'll never forget these words, Conal. He said to me, there's so many people out there trying to divide us. Don't be that guy that has this platform and does not use it wisely. Do things that bring us together. Do things that help lift Latinos. Yeah. And wow, that's like a filter that now I use every single day, every time I open a mic, every time I post something on social media, every time I'm in an interview, that I have Emilio's voice always bouncing in my head because he made so much sense, and that I've carried that with me. That's been very important. So the Estefans are like family, and especially to see these women, the Estefans, Emily and Lily and Gloria, of course, Emily's mom, sit there and discuss these topics that are so important, so real. And to be able to share them now on the My Cultura podcast network, Red Table Talk, the Estefans, very, very important. And Amara La Negra. Wow. So, Amara, very, very interesting. Amara started on first, she was a model. And she was probably one of the first little black girls that appeared on this Latino, show that made history in the United States, the longest running Spanish game show in Spanish television history. And, of course, I didn't know her back then, but I remember afterwards, you see pictures now. Amara was like but she was like, "Wow, she's so cute, she's so beautiful," but nothing ever happened. After that, I know when I did meet her, she told me, "Remember that little black girl in Sal Gigante years back?" I said, "No, I didn't even know you did Sal Gigante." She shows me the videos. Wow, and then she starts showing me the commercials she's done, and then the modeling and how people kind of like, "Oh, it's a cute little black girl," but it didn't go beyond that. I got the opportunity to host a TV show for Unimas. It's a sister network of the Univision network, Univision, El Palenque de Enrique Santos. And I brought Amara La Negra to co-host the show with me. And I'll never forget this. And I have apologized to Amara for it because I think it was wrong. That Univision, they probably had the best of intentions. They didn't intend on it. I don't believe that their intent was to discriminate. But in them trying to be so politically correct and their standards and practices, they would not allow Amara La Negra to use her name.
Oh, wow.
Because Amara La Negra is literally Amara the Black.
Yeah.
No, that's too controversial. So it was just Amara, and they struck out La Negra. I didn't say much of it because Amara was okay with it and we went forward. But now I look back, I said, I think that was a big mistake because that was your name, Amara La Negra.
Yeah.
I think you should have embraced it. And I feel bad that I didn't push you to embrace it and keep that name. So we did that run on TV. We've been friends with her mother. And just, Amara had so much success, of course, on Love and Hip Hop, on the reality show. And she's just a great storyteller. Every time she comes onto the show here, she just connects and the vibe and people. And she's just a beautiful representation of an Afro Latina. She embodies a strong voice that is unrelenting. And she's so comfortable in her skin. I said, man, you got to get more out there and just speak your mind. So I think, which is a natural fit, a great fit to have Amara La Negra have her own podcast.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Makes sense.
She's been awesome. So let me close on your shows. I mean, I think I want to make sure people understand you were doing podcasting prior to My Cultura. You had launched a show called Hola, My Name Is, which is this beautiful interview show where you chat sort of longer form and unrestricted in podcast form, great interviews. And you're going to use that same sort of stage, if you will, inside My Cultura to launch a tight 6-part series coming up soon called SOS Cuba. First of all, maybe just give us a little bit of your background vis-a-vis Cuba. Family from there, originally from Spain. Maybe just walk us through what's the story.
Yeah, all my family's from Cuba. My grandparents, both of my parents. Again, I'm lucky to have been born in this awesome country, thanks to because they opened their arms to my immigrating family and so many other Cubans. But it's been bittersweet to see, and hear the stories and the struggles of my grandparents and parents, and to live here in a democracy, and it's heartbreaking to hear the 62 plus 63 years of dictatorship on the island, and that my parents and grandparents were never able to vote on a free and independent Cuba. And now my grandparents are passing away, and they have not ever been able to return and to see their homeland free. So it's almost like a life mission, I think, and the right thing to do as a Cuban American with a platform that privileged. I would say I'm privileged, right? That I live in a democracy and that I know how democracy works. That's the only thing I know, right? Because that's the only system of government that I've lived my entire life. We're blessed to have lived under my entire life. So how it would be irresponsible for me not to see bad things happening and to see my grandparents passing, and that their homeland is not free, and to see the uprising that we saw on July 11th in the island and not do something for it. So yeah, anything we can do. I did an open letter to President Biden, and as a result of that, I've been invited now in times of COVID, of course, to various Zoom meetings with the White House, where policy is being discussed and how we can further help the Cuban people, give them support so that they can continue fighting for their freedom. And now having all these conversations and interviews and such, we said, wow, what a great opportunity to be able to do SOS Cuba podcast with a very good friend, fellow Cuban American, Jose Diaz Balart, very well respected journalist on Telemundo, and of course NBC, who has just now started a new project with MSNBC as well. And sit down and talk with political prisoners. Sit down and talk with very interesting. It's a 6-episode series, right? And one of the episodes I'm most proud of is the discrimination that exists for the blacks, Cuban blacks, Afro-Cubans, and for the LGBTQ plus community, because these are the two of the groups of people in Cuba that are probably the most discriminated, and that are actually some of the loudest voices in this fight, in the struggle. So to be able to talk with Cubans that live in the podcast SOS Cuba, you will hear and be able to watch as well, because we recorded all of this fascinating conversations with political prisoners. There's a trans woman that we interviewed that lives in Cuba, and everything that she's gone through, and how she was able to leave Cuba once to Russia, and she was actually in a Russian jail, and they got her into like a prostitution ring, and then shipped back to Cuba. And I say shipped back like if it were cattle or something, and that this is happening in modern times. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot. I've learned so much, and I hope that others will also learn about the struggle of the Cuban people. There's a lot of like a romance story, right, with Cuba and revolution and the Che Guevara, and a lot of people think that they were such great people. They weren't. They were very bad people, and they assassinated a lot of people. And there's a lot of people that are still till today living a real life genocide because of those horrible decisions that they made in the past. And the Cuban people are hungry. The Cuban people are dying. The numbers are dying big time because COVID is just out of hand. The repression that just for thinking different or suggesting a change in Cuba can bring you time in prison. And in Cuban prisons, it's not a secret. People are tortured. They're experimented on with different medications and things. There's electric. They use electricity to torture people. This has been said, and there's evidence of this. I'm not making it up. So to ignore this is happening on this day and age, and the people in the world is not making a bigger deal about it, bothers me.
It's an incredible series that you've put together on it, and I think if one thing, it like you said, I think we maybe have this sort of iconic, oversimplistic view of Cuban history, the Fidel Castros, the Che Guevaras, these huge, larger than life, almost caricatures. And if anything, the series anchors this all in very individual people, in people's stories, that makes it a little harder to oversimplify. It makes it it humanizes it, to put it very simply. But it's a beautiful series. Listen, man, I cannot thank you enough for taking a half hour to talk to us today. What we've done with My Cultura and launching a new network, I think to support and grow much faster Latinx creativity in podcasting is huge. We have a shot here at course correcting a whole medium early, and I think we're on our way. So I deeply appreciate the partnership, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you, brother. You're a very smart guy, probably one of the smartest people that I know, and I'm extremely proud to grow this network alongside you, Conal. Thank you very much. And you have not a half hour or 2 hours, 3 hours, all the time that you need from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening today. Really do appreciate it. We will see you next time. Be well, be safe, take care.
My Cultura Podcast Network. Gracias.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.